then she's appearing on Australian MasterChef. Well, presumably she's getting a stocking great fee for that program, which I know about. But I mean, let's say that, let's be honest, that feels like it's scraping the bottom of the TV barrel, to be a judge on the Celebrity MasterChef or the Australian MasterChef. I mean, I find it distasteful in the extreme. And speaking to Australian friends of mine, as you know, they are, in the main, appalled by what's going on. I don't know what the crowds were like in Melbourne when they turned up at the hospital, but yesterday today, stroke yesterday, she wasn't seen because she was recording this TV program. It's tacky, and that is my big takeaway from it.
Hi, all. Kinsey Schofield here. Welcome to Royally Unfiltered, the show that takes you behind palace gates like never before. We dive deep into the lives of the British royal family with exclusive insight from experts and insiders who know them best. This week, helping me tackle the biggest headlines is Talk Radio's royal correspondent, Rupert Bell, and internationally acclaimed royal author, Hugo Vickers. And Hugo, we're going to talk about multiple books today. So make sure you have them ready to Vanna White them for us. You're going to show them to us beautifully on display. If you somehow haven't heard of Beam's Dream Powder, where have you been? We literally love Beam on Kinsey Schofield Unfiltered. Does this sound like you? Night after night, the same story, tossing and turning, staring at the ceiling and relying on coffee to get through the day? Yuck. That's what makes Beam a go-to for better sleep. With Beam, nights feel more restful without the tossing and turning, and mornings start with real energy, not grogginess. Dream is made with a powerful blend of all natural ingredients: reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, apigenin, and melatonin. Plus, it tastes amazing. The cinnamon cocoa flavor is a must try and the perfect treat before bed. Beam has already helped 28 million nights of sleep for people across the country. So if you've been waiting for the right time to try Dream, this is it. Go to shopbeam.com/Kinsey, use code Kinsey, and get my exclusive offer for up to 40% off of Beam's Dream Powder. With my discount code Kinsey, you can get their best-selling Dream Powder for just $39. Stop pretending like you're still in your 20s and that you can survive a whole day without a good night's sleep. I know I need that advice myself. Place your order for Beam and see the difference today. Thank you both for being here. We do have to start with some unfortunate news. Let's talk about Harry and Meghan in Australia. Hugo, I haven't heard your take on this. But this looks absolutely ludicrous to me. Them wheeling out sick children so Meghan Markle can have her Diana moment. Harry's vulnerable admission that he didn't feel like he contributed enough to the birth of Archie and it sent him into therapy and journaling. But before we could digest his vulnerability, it's announced that Meghan Markle is the celebrity guest on MasterChef. It just feels like there's no rhyme or reason to this trip. There's no rhyme or reason to this brand. And they're bulldozing over the Queen's final wishes of an instruction of no half in, half out.
Yes, well, you used the word ludicrous, and I've already used it once today. I think you could guess exactly what I think about the whole thing. Of course, what makes it worse is that it's Australia, which is, one of the countries of which the king is still king, and the queen was still queen in her day, and because of echoes of their previous visit, which was actually rather successful, to be honest, when they were working within the system for the Queen in the Commonwealth. And now, of course, they go back there, and you hear a lot about the cost of security. A lot of people kind of anxious about that, and looking at the images, it sort of could be a sort of royal tour. It's not that different from the way royal tours done by those two. I mean, if they were doing a royal tour today, let's say, this is exactly what it would look like, pretty much, except of course that there's a commercial aspect, and the commerce is all to do with going into their pockets and not supporting Britain and the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth, etc. So I'm a bit down on the whole thing, to be honest.
Well, what a pleasant way to say that, though. You are very kind in your delivery. Rupert, do you think it's calculated that similar to Canada, where Harry met with veterans at a venue that Queen Elizabeth had previously visited, that Harry and Meghan go to this hospital that has this connection to Queen Elizabeth. It seems like they're obsessed with this proximity. And they're not working royals. It's not a working tour, but it feels incredibly intentional that they pursue these venues where his grandmother has a history, because in every news segment, they show the Queen revealing the plaque, cut to Harry and Meghan walking down the same halls. It's so dishonest.
Well, we talked about it before it started in our latest edition of Heirs or Spares, but obviously since then, a lot has happened. That hospital visit. Now, it's not supposed to be a royal tour. So did they pay to go there? Have they made some charitable donation to the Melbourne hospital? Have they done something to the homeless, which is definitely trying to rain on William's parade with homelessness? The whole thing is tawdry, in my view, in the way they're saying it's not a royal tour, but goodness me, does it look like a royal tour in all but name. There he is today, wearing his medals, honouring the Australian war dead, and obviously the Invictus element of what he's doing, which I get. But then she's appearing on Australian MasterChef. Well, presumably she's getting a stocking great fee for that program, which I know about. But I mean, let's be honest, that feels like it's scraping the bottom of the TV barrel, to be a judge on the Celebrity MasterChef or the Australian MasterChef. I mean, I find it distasteful in the extreme. And speaking to Australian friends of mine, as you know, they are, in the main, appalled by what's going on. I don't know what the crowds were like in Melbourne when they turned up at the hospital, but yesterday yesterday, she wasn't seen because she was recording this TV program. It's tacky, and that is my big takeaway from it.
Hugo, I kind of get tickled by the idea of Meghan Markle being the guest judge, the celebrity judge on MasterChef, when Netflix's big crisis surrounding With Love Meghan was that Meghan can't cook to save her life. I mean, she says at one point, like, I don't bake. It's like inconvenient. I don't bake. But MasterChef is going to have her as the expert guest, as the expert judge. I mean, she'll really do anything, huh?
Yeah, well, I suppose it's good for MasterChef because they get a bit of
Yeah.
publicity. We are talking about MasterChef. Let's mention it again, MasterChef. No, that's really the point of it, and no doubt she's being well rewarded for it. I think it's probably also fair to say that there must be quite a number of celebrities who appear on such programs whose skills in the kitchen are not perhaps all that they should be. I don't know.
Yeah, I
Well,
just
I know how it works because a friend of mine used to present the original program. And obviously, MasterChef in this country has had a few hiccups along the way, with one or two presenters being given the tin tack, as they say, for controversial bits in their private life. But the food will turn up probably cold, and you'll have to sort of imagine that it's good, and the whole thing is, look, she wouldn't know a good meal if it hit her between the face. So I mean, I think why they've done it. They've given her a socking great big fee, and they will fawn all over her, and because obviously that's the nature of the program. And that's just what she wants. She wants people fawning at her feet, and here she can fawn. But my goodness me, I wouldn't take any notice of her ability as a culinary judge.
no, not at all.
Sorry, Hugo. I got quite deep there with that opinion, but
No, we love that. We needed that
I'll
from
back
you.
off if you want me to, Hugo.
No,
Just in
we
case I
like
get.
we like your energy. Hugo, it does feel like Meghan Markle's back in 2015 before she met Prince Harry. These were the kinds of gigs she was trying to secure for herself, sending her own emails. Where's the growth? Where's the Duchess? I don't see a Duchess in this. And I think that that's why they are trying to choreograph and manipulate these royal lookalike engagements, because, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, she's not doing a 3-day retreat where for $3,000 you can get a photo with her. She's not gonna, be a judge on MasterChef. But Meghan's still trying to like toe the line, I guess, where she still gets some pictures where she's a duchess. She wants you to think she's a duchess, but her actions say otherwise.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting thought. I mean, I wonder the whole Duchess thing kind of makes me a bit concerned because, and I think possibly they might be a little bit concerned as well when you see how very easy it is for the king to remove titles from people when he wants to, because of course that's what they're marketing and that's very important to them. So yeah, I suppose she's doing similar things to what she did before, but the clips that I've seen, they sort of meeting people and the way they meet them is exactly the way members of the royal family tend to meet them. So it's also pseudo. I mean, they really ought to just. I mean, well, once again, it's reinventing themselves in a new way. Here we are talking about them because this time they've gone to Australia. They'll do something else later on. They'll go somewhere else. They'll do something else which will interest people. But I rather long for the time when people actually cease to be interested at all and they
Yeah.
just do private life.
Well, you say in your new book about Queen Elizabeth that Harry really thought going into the Sandringham agreement or Sandringham summit that he was going to get the half in, half out approved, and that he walked away disappointed. He flies home to Canada with like his pride in his carry on because he was in and he felt really defeated over that. Are you not feeling like they're forcing that half in, half out look at least?
Well, yes. I mean, do you remember before he left? I think it was on that occasion because it was sort of he came and went a bit. But there was one time when he actually made a speech and he actually told us that he would have liked to so-called go on serving, and that this was no longer going to be possible. Um, and having said that, of course, it's often forgotten that the Queen did give them a whole year to think it through, to see how it was going, and so that they could, in theory, have come back should they have wanted to, had things not worked out, which actually was extremely generous, as we know they didn't. But then they just, by that stage, were doing their own thing. And by that stage, of course, they were also on quite a roll, which I don't think they are anymore. Things we kept hearing about sort of multi-million dollar deals and things. We aren't hearing those anymore, are we?
No. Rupert, based on what you're seeing out of Australia, and you and I were talking privately about how just uncomfortable we were with the hospital visit and Meghan sitting there serving frittatas at a homeless shelter wearing thousands upon thousands of dollars worth of clothing and jewelry. Do you think that King Charles for the future of the monarchy might seriously consider stripping them of their titles because I think that they are a liability to the monarchy, and it's so unfair to leave William to have to deal with this chaos, this hurricane that is
Well,
the Sussexes.
yeah, well, they must be frustrated. I mean, he's even had a pop at his father's parenting skills
Mhm.
as well today. So yet again, he's sort of saying, well, I'm not really having a go at my father. I'm just talking, we have to learn as a parent from our parents. Well, if that's not a jibe, criticizing his father, which will be deeply hurtful to him, particularly as he continue. He's got a major event in planning in next week when he's got I don't know, to go to America with all that's going on and represent this country. The last thing he needs to be having is his son questioning or sort of suggesting that he wasn't brought up in the best circumstances. Well, we know that to be the case because obviously the parents were divorced. So, I mean, if I was the king, I'd probably be losing my temper and saying, off with their titles. So
If Rupert
I
was
feel.
king,
Yeah, if I was king, it would be off with their titles because I just think, so they can stop them. But maybe that would just be a step too far for the king, who does have, sort of a sympathetic, much more sympathetic side than perhaps I do have, and understand. Look, it's his son, and he's got a wayward son who just seems to endlessly want to snoop at the institution. Yet there he is going around behaving as if he's part of the institution. And I
mm,
think that's what's so frustrating for all and sundry. You don't want to be in it, but your only raison d'etre is to behave like you are still a member of the royal family. You can't have your cake and eat it. And unfortunately, he is getting away with it to some extent because that's what he's gone and done in Australia. He's monetized the trip and he's done the things that he used to be very good at, turning up at a hospital, doing the Invictus. He was good at it. But now he's made his bed. He shouldn't be allowed to lie in this particular bed in Australia.
Hugo, I know that I'm as frustrated as Rupert is, but we do get to look forward to things like Trooping the Color and Garter Day, where the world is reminded of how irrelevant Harry and Meghan are because they're not on the balcony. They'll probably never be on the balcony again. They're not included in these sacred ceremonies that are so important to the history and the tradition of the British royal family. Fake it till you make it only goes so far, Meghan.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right, and of course, I remember thinking at a time that, of course, they rather liked coming back, and they needed, in a way, to be on the balcony because then people realised they were part of the show. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it was unfortunate, in my view, that they were happened to be in England when the Queen died because they were very much a part of all that, and you may remember that even pretty much all the Sunday newspapers showed the pictures of the Waleses and the Sussexes coming out together rather than the Accession Council, which was actually pretty important, for the history of our country. But anyway, that's the way of the modern media. So yeah. Anyway, they stopped all that. So she's not going to be on the balcony again. I'm sure she'll never be on the balcony again. I suppose he might be one day. Things can change, but
Mm-hmm.
there's no vision of it at the moment. That's for sure.
You're absolutely right. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this story, Rupert, because we talk about the Queen and we talk about how careful she was. I mean, they always say she never set a foot wrong. Like the Queen was just so perfect and never did anything controversial. Well, out comes this story. It's from the new book, The Queen and Her Presidents by Susan Page, claiming that the Queen made fun of First Lady Melania Trump and former First Lady Nancy Reagan behind their backs. They call her a skilled mimic, which we'll have to ask Hugo about if he has any stories about that. But they talk about how she reportedly made fun of Melania Trump by portraying her as silent and remote. And then there's another example in the book of making fun of Nancy Reagan, Ronald Reagan's wife. She was spotted doing an impression of the First Lady, whose look of rapt adoration at her Ronnie was often mocked. I guess I was surprised by this because it's my understanding that she had a good relationship with both of these presidents. What was your initial reaction to the story?
I'm not surprised that she did it, really,
Oh,
because I think she, right? I mean, Hugo will agree with me because she did like a laugh. And
yeah.
if she was in private company, why not? We all do. We probably all sort of cock a snook at someone and maybe have a sort of slight joke. And she was no exception. I don't think. I mean, I know, and I'm not surprised. I mean, I'm sure she got on very well with Ronald Reagan. He was a charmer, in a sort of old school kind of way. And she would have loved being around. I mean, you probably know more about that than I do, but I mean, I'm pretty sure. With Melania, I'm not sure that as individuals, the Queen and Melania seem to have, poles apart in terms of the sort of whole approach to it. And that sort of glassy look was Melania's sort of style in her when she was first lady for the first time, wasn't it? Just to look as if there's nothing behind. So I can immediately see that she perhaps would. But Hugo, I mean, you had many dealings with the Queen. I'm sure she loved a giggle, if I'm not mistaken. And presumably you saw a bit of that, and her doing this doesn't seem too left field at all, does it?
No, and actually, if you look at the Edward Mertzoff documentary, which is well worth looking at anyway, because it's a fabulous film made in 1992, there's a scene when they're on Britannia and the Reagans are talking to the Queen, and Mrs. Reagan is wanting decaffeinated coffee. And the Queen keeps saying, "Is it decaffeinated coffee for Mrs. Reagan? Are you sure that the coffee is decaffeinated?" I mean, have a look at it. So, it's only a step away from that. I mean, I remember thinking at the time that was very funny, and equally thinking, of course, that Mrs. Reagan would only just be extremely impressed that the Queen was taking such concern that her coffee should be decaffeinated. I think that's yes, of course, the Queen. I saw the Queen pulling faces sometimes privately, funny faces and things, but I never actually heard her doing a mimicry. But I know she did, and I mean, I think she had the table in stitches. Particularly if somebody was really pompous earlier in the day. That's your way of letting off steam, isn't it? And in a way, it's rather affectionate. And so I think that Susan Page is a very good writer, and I think she's written a very good book, and it'll be very interesting. And I did talk to her at one point about the presidents, and it was on that occasion that she asked me, what did I think about President Trump? Trump saying that he was the Queen's favourite president. And I simply said, don't you think the Queen sent every president home thinking that they were the favourites? That was her skill.
I guess so. The takeaway is that it wasn't mean spirited. While it might come off that way in a tabloid headline, it was just the Queen. Like I like the way you use the word affectionate.
Well, Hugo, she accused me to my brother once of being a drunk because I fell over at Ascot and got a black eye. And I used to present the in-house TV. And the rumor was that she turned round to and said, what's the brother of my trainer been doing? Has he been drinking? So, I mean, I can imagine her. She would love, but I can assure the late Her Majesty that I hadn't been drinking. But the point is, she loved a joke. And she didn't like pomposity. And I think that's, in a way, her having a pop at saying things about Nancy Reagan doesn't feel what she thought of her prime ministers. God only knows. I wonder whether we'll ever hear what. Well, she wasn't poor old Liz Truss. I think only had 2 days. But Boris Johnson, I'm sure she had a view.
I do know that I put it in my book, I read rather wickedly, that later that day she described Liz Truss as Liz Tough.
Ah,
I love that. I love it. Let's talk about your book, Hugo. Your new Queen Elizabeth biography reveals that Prince Philip quietly lived with pancreatic cancer for 8 years before his death. I thought that this was incredible new information to me. The condition was inoperable, and the Duke returned home to recuperate after an initial hospital stay. You write, doctors had detected a shadow on his pancreas and had cut him right across his stomach. The verdict was inoperable pancreatic cancer. It was thought that he might not be seen in public ever again, but the Duke outwitted the pessimists. You write that Philip did not want to reach his 100th birthday because he disliked the fuss attended at such events, which made me think he probably really liked his own funeral. He probably was like, this is nice, low key. I'm not overwhelmed. Queen Elizabeth II, A Personal History is available now, we should stress. But yes, show us that beautiful book. I love that cover. Was this something difficult for you to share with us? Were you concerned about sharing that with us? Because it is really interesting information.
Well, I was slightly surprised by how much the things that were picked out of my book, because as you saw, it's a very big book. And I just really mainly remember that he had that operation. And there was a time when he was sitting on a sort of chaise longue or in a chair or something outside the castle, and it was the summer. And then, suddenly he reappeared again, which was remarkable. But of course, you can have forms of cancer when you're very old, which don't sort of move around as much as they do when people are younger. So, and I've had various people writing to me saying, well, this is, I knew somebody who did this, or even one person said, well, this is encouraging news for me, because you do think it's going to be terminal. But at any rate, yes, he did it. I mean, he was very, very strong, and he did a wonderful job. I mean, I was sorry for him that he had to go into hospital for about 2 months at the beginning of the year in which he actually died. And it took a long time for them to get him out of hospital. He had 2 operations. They nearly lost him a couple of times. And of course, the real reason that they took so long to get him home was that they had to get nurses who were absolutely 100% COVID free. And he came home, and the media they had 3 of the entrances to Windsor Castle monitored 24 hours a day in case he came home or in case the Queen came out to visit him, as it were. And I can think of at least 5 entrances to Windsor Castle. You'd be delighted to hear that Prince Philip entered in one of the ones that was not monitored. That he wasn't seen again after that. He did once answer the telephone to a lady in waiting. Was slightly surprised to get him on the phone. And then there was this rather charming story that the night before he died, he gave his nurses the slip and shuffled along the corridor on his Zimmer frame, helped himself to a beer, and was found drinking it in the oak room. The next morning, he got up and he had a bath, and he didn't feel well, and he just died actually rather suddenly. And of course, he would have been delighted because he didn't want to live to be 100. He didn't want the fuss. You're absolutely right about that. There had been no plans made. I think if he'd been well enough, all that would have happened, you'd have seen a picture of him going to church, which is what, of course, he did rather more publicly on his 80th and 90th birthdays. And the funeral was pared down. It was already, the planned funeral in London was pretty slim. He was going to go from St James's Palace, just up that bit of the Mall along Constitution Hill, then get into the green Land Rover that he had created, and come down to Windsor. But of course, there's no point if he died in Windsor Castle in taking him back to London and then back to Windsor. So the funeral was absolutely perfect, beautifully done, arranged by him, and pared down to the minimum. And everybody did a really good job. And I thought it was immensely moving.
I think that this is likely a tacky question, but I know that my audience would be curious, Hugo. If we knew, if people within the inner circle or the family knew that they almost lost Prince Philip and that he was ill, is Harry aware of this, and he's still sitting down with Oprah Winfrey and unleashing this hell on this family while Prince Philip is slowly dying?
It's not at all tacky. I mean, we all knew that Prince Philip was in hospital at the time when when the Oprah Winfrey thing was broadcast. We all knew that, and I mean, I thought it was absolutely disgraceful that they should do such a thing and add to the Queen's stress at that particular moment. I mean, that was really awful. It should not have happened. And of course, it was very difficult to criticize that interview immediately afterwards because of the various issues that she produced, which would have made one look, racist or going on about mental health or something. So it was tricky. But as time has gone on, I think we've worked out basically that a lot of the things she said were absolute nonsense.
Rupert, what was your takeaway from Prince, this story about Prince Philip? Kind of resilience. You get the sense that he was much tougher than he let on. I mean, he let on that he was pretty tough, but I was really impressed. It shows me why King Charles is so courageous in his fight against cancer and why he continues to still show up.
Well, I think Prince Philip is just always was a no fuss kind of guy, and he didn't want people, from day one. It was no, I don't want people fawning all over me. He knew he was, he had the common sense to realize, look, I'm in my 90s. It's what happens. We get ill. That would have been his sort of perfectly dogmatic approach to it. Yes, I lived to whatever age it was in the end, but he wouldn't want people. And that's why he stepped back just to enjoy or try and ease into, what ultimately, sadly, was his death. But, it was bound to happen. And he didn't want people at all stages. He didn't want people. He couldn't suffer fools. And that was his overriding sort of mantra throughout life. If you didn't behave normally in front of him, he used to get cross. And he had pancreatic cancer, and then at the same, let me just get on. And yes, I love the idea, and I do hear of other people, as Hugo said, got people contacting the idea of having a quiet beer the night before you finally die is almost like it's perfect.
Yeah.
In many ways, just to wake up in the morning and then I'll just go back to bed. And then I've had a lovely, reflect on what, in his case, was a life well lived, and at the same time know that there was a great deal of affection for him. It was the thing. Obviously, the overriding image I have of the funeral is the figure of the Queen sitting on her own. But it must have been, if you were in the chapel when they lowered the body, that must have been just the most um, emotional moment and private moment for the Queen when it was lowered down there. And obviously we didn't see that, and quite rightly, but as a moment for those 30 members who were there, it would have been a deeply emotional moment.
What they
Yeah.
did, which was very clever, was that they had a
Mm.
pipe, do you remember, going up the side of the piping the lament, which meant that the TV cameras were removed from it. And actually, when the
Mm.
cameras went back, of course, he'd gone. A lot of people wondered what had happened. With the Queen at her funeral, where we had followed her for the whole 10 days, and I think we did need to see the coffin descending, and they did show it, because in a way there was a tremendous finality about it, wasn't there? But going back to Prince Philip, if I may, just one other thing. I much like what Crown Prince Pavlos of Greece said about him. He said, if Prince Philip said to you, what the devil are you doing here? That was his way of saying, how extremely nice to see you.
I love that. Yeah, I want to ask you before we move on, Hugo. You also mentioned in the book that the Queen really wasn't aware that he was heading on his way out, and there was a joke that he never told her goodbye when he would run errands or when he would do royal engagements, and she would say to somebody, "Can you let me know before Prince Philip leaves for the day or for the," and they would go, he left 20
Uh,
minutes ago.
well, it wasn't so much when he left for the day, but if he went going off on a trip or something, she would
Mm,
say to him, let me know when he's gone. Oh, he's already left. But that was what sort of person he was,
yeah.
and so I think again, tabloids sort of turn everything around. I mean, it was a sort of joke almost that she was
No,
furious.
that's how I took it. Like in your book, it comes
Yeah,
across very sweet, like the kind of husband and wife dynamic, inside joke dynamic
yeah.
that, they would tease each other about.
Yeah, as so often in life, he left without saying goodbye.
Yeah.
When
Mhm.
people do that, you'll find. I mean, I
Yeah.
think a lot of people, but sometimes the people in hospital, and the family goes out for a cup of tea, and the person just slips away quietly. I must say, I think that's what I would do if I had the possibility. Don't
Oh,
want people sort of around listening. No, no,
oh
it's
my
a
God.
private thing.
Yeah. No, I think that that's fair. Rupert, tell me about your Duchess of Windsor story because you had a fun sit down and got some inside knowledge, and you wanted to share that with our audience.
Well, particularly with Hugo, because I know he'd be aware of these things, but I sat next to a friend of mine whose father worked very closely with Edward VIII, and actually they lived in Forest Lodge back in the day, in the 30s, and actually for a long time. So anyway, I sat down next to her, and she talked about how when she was a 17-year-old girl, she went to Paris and went actually to the Windsor's house. And what was so interesting, she said the Duchess of Windsor couldn't have been more charming, couldn't have been nicer. Yet what she does remember as a 17-year-old girl was this lonely figure who was her husband. He had this room that was a shrine to his royal days, as if he was still hankering after being a part of the royal family. And when you look at the sort of similarities now, when you see the Sussexes, it's a sort of brazen attempt at hankering after their times in the royal family. Yet, I just wonder, and I was thinking about it, and I'm going to get what's Hugo's take on it. The fact is, he had to give up being king for marrying her. And when you think how world has moved on, that you now have a king who is divorced, married a divorcee, yet, okay, it was a bit of a sort of, there was a discussion, but everything more or less carried on seamlessly. Yet, as a result of the Edward VIII, then wanting to marry a divorcee and an American to boot, it led to him having to abdicate. It shows how the world or the royal monarchy has evolved now that people are much more understanding. Because, I mean, when you read books about the abdication crisis, I mean, the country seems to have come to a grinding halt when it happened. So it did sort of draw home to me that, at times the Duchess of Windsor perhaps got a bad rap. And I know the Queen Mother certainly was not fond of her at all, believing, that suddenly her husband, who wasn't expected to be king, suddenly finds himself with the top job and having to be the king during the Second World War.
Well, that's all extremely interesting, and I'm absolutely with you on this one. Certainly, the Edward VIII. What if she ever made a mistake? I remember Lady Diana Cooper, who was a great friend of his and was considered at one point possibly to be a bride for the Prince of Wales. She said if I'd taken him on, I'd have made him to be a cowboy in Wyoming. Instead of what she did was to create a court in exile, a miniature court in exile, with footmen in royal livery and coronets all over the place. And she turned herself into the epitome of most elegant royal duchess imaginable, and we had some pretty elegant royal duchesses over here at the time as well. But she was a good host, and she did look after him. And I don't think that that's what's going to happen in the present situation. And equally, I think what's very interesting is that if you think about how it affected Princess Margaret as single, unmarried princess was not allowed, or anyway discouraged from marrying a divorced equerry. Whereas a few years later, Princess Anne, as a divorced princess, marries an unmarried equerry with hardly a sort of glance from anybody. So things have changed, and the Duchess of Windsor, I think, would be rather surprised by, how things turned out later on, considering what happened to them.
But Hugo, wouldn't you argue that Edward didn't want to be king? Like this was maybe this was an out for him, the falling in love with this woman that was, actually convenient because ultimately he didn't want that responsibility.
I think if you'd asked him that, he would have denied it, and he would have said, "No, no, no, I wanted to be king. I had lots of plans and things," but he said, "I wanted to marry her." When pushed into the decision, he took that decision. I was sort of hold up another book at this point because we've got
That's
this
right.
one coming out quite soon, which is really what happened to. I promise no more books. What happened to the Duchess after the Duke died when her lawyer locked her up, which was absolutely shocking, which will be a film with Joan Collins and Isabella Rossellini, I think coming later this year with a bit of luck.
Yeah, behind closed doors, and it takes us behind the familiar abdication narrative and into the Duchess of Windsor's final chapter, a period not marked by glamour, but by isolation, vulnerability, and you argue, Hugo, exploitation. And you were given access to, first, I loved it because initially you're given just a few documents and you go away and you put something together and you come back to your source. And she loved what you did so much that she said, okay, I'm going to give you access to everything. And you reveal how tortured this poor woman was, Wallis Simpson, towards the end of her life, and violated she was, um, so that people could take advantage of her. And it really is just the most devastating story. And I'm really proud of you for sharing that. And people are getting to, some people are getting to hear it for the first time, and they certainly will when Joan Collins stars in the movie.
They will. I mean, the awful thing is that the Duchess of Windsor was a very rich widow. She had no relations of her own. She was not on particularly good terms with her husband's relations. She had a sly butler, a dodgy doctor, an avaricious Swiss banker, and a dishonest lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of uh, group, you're in serious trouble. And she was in a terrible position. And then she didn't eat properly, and she lived on little nips of vodka. And eventually she collapsed and went into the American hospital. And they should have allowed her to die in 1975. But they patched her up and sent her home, and she was like 10 years lying on a bed, eventually on a life support machine.
Oh.
It was absolutely shocking, really awful.
Hu- Hugo, would you have thought? I mean, I know it's all speculation, but could he have been a good king in the Second World War? What do you think?
I mean, most people will tell you not a hope not a hope
Mm.
at all, that absolutely not. But, he might have been, who knows? I mean, I certainly don't subscribe to all this sort of Nazi stuff that we're being fed the whole time.
Yeah.
It's interesting that the further you get away from the people who really knew what was going on, the more ridiculous the stories that are pushed out about people.
And because this friend of mine's father, as I say, worked for
Yeah.
Edward VIII, and actually, she's
I
got the
remember him. I know
most.
exactly who he was. I know who
Well, I think you probably know who I'm talking about. But
I
we'll keep
do.
it private. We'll keep it private anyway.
I saw
Um,
him. I saw him once. Yeah.
yes. Anyway, it was. She said that her father just. And I asked her. I said, "Well, what did he think of Edward VIII?" He said he was. He was a lovely man, but whether he had the commitment to serve as
Mm.
king, that may have been his sort of Achilles heel. But had
That's a good
all the
point.
charm in the world. And when he was Prince of Wales, everyone loved him, wasn't he? Because he was, okay, he
Yeah.
was a dashing debonair, really of the time, the sort of the jazz age. He absolutely fitted that model. But actually, when he to get promoted to the sort of top job, and then that being king was a very different, almost feels very different than it is now. So it is actually, he created great loyalty, but he maybe just didn't have that something that gave him that, right, I've got to put, he didn't want to put country ahead of love in this case, which clearly was a love affair in the end.
Yeah, and it's an extraordinary story because not many men, in fact, no man has ever given up sort of reigning over two-thirds of the world's population for one woman and one rather particular woman who didn't seem to be, particularly good looking or particularly interesting. I mean, she had a lot of style, a lot of flair. She was very funny. She was very good, a good maîtresse de maison, looked after the house very well and a good hostess. And I'm sure she was very kind to Sir, whatever his name was, his daughter, and
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, she was what you saw was what you got. But I mean, she was very funny. I mean, she used to say things like, "People are always telling me to look up my old friends. Look them up, dig them up."
Oh, well, I have certainly enjoyed speaking to the two of you. If you are curious to know more about Wallis, Behind Closed Doors is available for pre-order, I think now, Hugo, isn't it? You
Yeah, it
just
comes out in
recorded the
just
audio.
today.
I told my friend Stephanie. She said she was looking for it on Audible. I said Hugo's doing the audio for it right now. We also have Queen Elizabeth
How long
II.
does it how long does it take you to record one of your books? This last one is 672 pages. How many days are you locked away in a recording studio? Just out of curiosity.
6 days. I've done 2.5 so far.
Well,
Oh,
that's amazing, Hugo. And Queen Elizabeth II, A Personal History, is available now wherever you get your favorite books. Hugo Vickers, what a pleasure to spend some time with you. I know you're a globetrotter, so thanks for making the time for me. I really appreciate it. Rupert Bell, you and I have a date on Monday. I see you all the time. So
well, that sounds so disappointed. Ah, I see you all the time. Hugo, lovely to catch up with you. Catch up soon
Thank
with
you.
you, and well done with your latest book.
yeah,
Thank you.
again, yeah, congratulations. Agree with us, disagree with us, let us know in the comments below. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend. And go buy a book. Go buy a Hugo book. Bye, everyone.